here, and I will change the stage here because we have a special guest. 2 days ago we didn't knew that we will have him, but today we have him. That's very nice.
Old meets new.
Old meets new, right? This is Karsten Nohl, and I think you will introduce him a little bit.
Yeah, Karsten is the one who discovered the security flaws in the signaling system 7 of the phone company, which ties together every single telephone in the whole wide world, including, of course, cell phones, land phones, and just about every other phone. So we'll give him a few moments here and take a break and give him time to set up his presentation material. In the meantime, I have something for you. So I think I'm going to do that right now, actually, by going to my iTunes and give you guys a little taste of what it was like 45 years ago when you're hacking the phone system using the blue box. I should still get my audio. Yeah, there we go. Let me get it to the beginning where it sets up the call.
Yeah, every time we get a supervision off hook, except for the first time when he whistled off initially, there's this bob type sound. That is the tone.
What you're listening to here is Evan Doorbell.
That is being put on the line.
This was recorded in 1975.
Toll tandem, yes. And that's why we're hearing that on the handshakes. It's not part of the handshake. It's actually something that Forest Hills adds. The reason it does that is because in the old days, busy signals used to flash supervision, and it was thought that if the call was so long...
Given what we're discussing...
Right. Not this long, but long.
Nothing was ever this long. At least
right.
We hope it never was.
Right.
But you could see where you might get... If there was a busy signal flashing at the far end, you could kind of lose that in the clicking.
Right.
So it was felt that they had to reapply the busy tone locally.
One of the things he always does first when he calls himself is that he just flashes. He picks up the phone and hangs it up, but not long enough to charge the call.
That's what it sounds like when you're stacking trunks. Each one of those little chirps you hear is a trunk. The setup of the call was early on. Yeah, I don't know if they'll find it or not, but this is sort of how it was set up.
Even as a mischief device, this is a very poor technique.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Here we go. These are multi-frequency tones. These were in-band signaling tones used by the phone company pre-1979, before they switched over to SS7. What you're hearing is just a blue box with a little manual dial on it. And each time he dials up KP042 start, or whatever it is he's dialing, he's adding another trunk to the line. So it's beeping back and forth, back and forth, back and forth until the quality of the call gets so bad that it won't pass him anymore. Now he's calling himself. He's calling himself out his other number now. So he's got two phones, one right next to himself. And there's the phone ringing. As you can see, it's pretty weak, going through all those trunks. You ready?
I guess we should say something about the tone applier.
I think we're going to stop it at this point now. And Karsten, you're on.
Well, thank you. Honored to be here. Good to feel young again. Thank you for making that happen. So we're literally coming full circle because what you just said, the techniques you showed here, they stopped working sometimes in the 70s or early 80s because the technology was introduced that we then looked at 30, I guess almost 40 years later to discover some flaws in that. So basically what you had already done in the 70s, we can now today do against more modern.
Yes, the phone companies back to their old tricks again, trying to cut a few corners, just like they did with in-band signaling. Now what they've done, they've decided to allow an interface to the SS7 through TCP/IP, a thing that they call SIGTRAN. When was this technology developed?
Definitely before I was born, so I don't know. For me,
What,
it
you
was
mean
always
SIGTRAN?
there, right?
Really?
Well, definitely before I started looking in technology. But basically, phone networks, as we know them today, on some level, they're digital, right? So the phreaking sounds that you just played, those are barely heard in phone networks anymore. Sometimes touch phones still emit them to dial a number, but the phone networks themselves, they're all digital. And that's what I'm going to talk about for the next 20 minutes or so, if that's okay.
Yes.
And then then I guess we'll get into y'all's questions. Let me briefly say who I am. I'm a local researcher here out of Berlin. Run a small company where geeks, I guess, as we all probably call ourselves these days, come together to investigate whether the technology we use on a daily basis is secure enough, right? Or whether large companies are putting us at unnecessary risks. And usually, of course, we find that is in fact the case, that companies do not take much good care of the users' data. And we find that among those big companies, phone companies tend to be the worst. And if it takes 40 years for somebody to find flaws in this protocol that we looked at, that of course means that for 40 years those flaws have existed indeed. And probably, in all likelihood, we were not the first to find them, but some state agencies or some criminal spies have found them first and would have exploited them for the better part of those 40 years. So let me quickly perhaps start with something we did, I guess 2 years ago, when somebody from Australia came over, a TV crew that said, can you spy on Australians? And I've never been to Australia, and even since I have not. But still, the following thing happened, and I hope the audio is loud enough. Just playing from my computer. Let's see if that works. So this guy is actually in Berlin, but the other guy you'll see, he's a senator in Australia, so one of their political leaders. So this is in Berlin and this is in Australia. So this is the guy in Berlin reading the text messages that people in Australia are exchanging. Okay, so for those who didn't hear the audio, this senator says this is Orwell, just 30 years too late. This is the end of anybody's privacy. And of course, this is a news broadcast, so that they try to overstate the actual risk. But the fact that some kids sitting in Berlin can spy on one of the political leaders of another country with basically no special access anywhere, that in fact is shocking. And I'll explain very briefly why that is possible. So the technology at the core of this is exactly what John just said, got him out of the game of analog phreaking, SS7. It's a global network, kind of like the internet, but one that only phone companies connect to. Of course, there's hundreds and hundreds of phone companies and other companies like Skype and Google who connect to this today. So there's probably upwards of 1,000 companies to connect to this very exclusive network.
I think they called it the Rose Garden at one point because everybody in the system was trusting everybody else.
Right, and you from the way that people behave on a network, that still seems the case. And of course, for a network where thousands of companies are connected, that would strike me as a naive way of dealing with trust. Anyway, what's the SS7 network supposed to do? It's supposed to exchange information between network, for instance, text messages. They need to go from one network to another, right? So that goes over SS7. Also, it enables roaming. So it enables the customers of one network to actually use another network services, usually in a different country. So that, for instance, the charging information can be sent to your home network, or that cryptographic keys, which are only known on your SIM card and in the home network, that they can be sent to your roaming network, so that you can actually have an encrypted phone call, or at least the air interface is encrypted. So this has a lot of meaningful uses. The very same technology, though, SS7, is not just used between networks, but also within a network. So, for instance, if you drive out of Berlin and you're on the phone, let's say on a train, you may leave one part of the country and enter another part, and there's different switching centers responsible for you. So now the one switching center has to hand over the call to the other switching center, and again, that happens over an internal SS7 exchange. It's almost like roaming, but it happens within one country. And the larger the country is, the more such areas exist. But you can see how that can get messy if you use the same technology for kind of obviously international uses like exchanging text messages, and obviously internal uses like, hey, give me the key, the cryptographic key for the current phone call, because that user is roaming with me now, right? This could get tricky if the one type of message, the more internal one, is actually exchanged over an international interface. And people have criticized SS7 for a long time for being insecure, but hardly ever did people specify what they meant by that. And that changed with a Washington Post article in 2014, where in fact they traced down a couple of companies who very publicly on the internet offered services to use SS7 for tracking people. Tracking as in you get somebody's rough location. Not GPS coordinates most of the time, but the cell somebody's connected to, right? And in a big city, there'd be probably one cell after every 3 or 4 houses or something. These smaller cells, 4G especially, has pretty small cells. So you have a pretty good idea of where somebody is, right?
These systems are sold to companies that want to keep track of, let's say, their deliveries and things like that, right?
Well, I honestly don't know who the customers are, because it would strike me as always illegal unless you have consent of the person whom you do track. But aside from that, this is being offered on the internet to really anybody who asks, and you don't have to specify a reason. You just pay them a few dollars per trace, and you then know where any one phone number in the world currently resides.
So it's possible to legitimately get access to the SS7 network.
Sure, yeah. I mean, all you'd have to do to really officially get access is start a phone company, right? And there's tiny phone companies, especially SIP companies that have no physical presence, but they're only on the internet. But much easier, of course, is to go to any one of these companies, pay them a little bit of money, and get access through that, right? So there's a lot of people who resell the access that they already have.
So sort of like there's third-party resellers or something like that, right?
Yeah. And as I said, there's probably upwards of 1,000 companies on SS7, right? And you can imagine that some of them are not doing so well, or there's disgruntled employees who want to make a little bit cash on the side. So you'll always find somebody who sells you some level of access into SS7.
So you still get those sleazy spam messages on your SS7, on your SMS messages, and that brings to another light. I'm sure a lot of you all are using Signal and WhatsApp for your secure communications. Well, now it's possible to hijack these connections. Kind of explain that.
Well, we'll get to that in a couple of slides. So far, this is 2014. The world knows SS7 is insecure, and the world thinks that means you can be tracked. But you can be tracked through a message that shouldn't exist in the first place. It's called the anytime interrogation message. SS7 has different messages. And that message, of course, has a creepy name, and it's really a spying feature. But there's no legitimate use for the anytime interrogation, which gives you, just based on the phone number, the current location. So what networks ended up doing, pretty much all over the world, is stop accepting this message. Right? They didn't know why anybody had put it in the standard in the first place. They had overlooked it for decades. But thanks to this Washington Post story, they stopped accepting it. And then the journalists come to us, of course, and they say, is it fixed now? And we say, no, absolutely not. The SS7 problem is a lot greater than that. It's almost like if on the internet you block, I don't know, port 21 because you know FTP is insecure, and think that fixes the internet, that now the whole internet is secure. So you fixed one little thing. And so sure enough, for instance, for these Australians, we tracked around that senator, and we used different SS7 messages. Turns out that aside from this obvious spying message, there's a whole bunch of other messages, in fact, over 100 messages in SS7 today, and many of them give you some information. What we do here, for instance, in this example, is we use two different messages to string together information. So the first message, SRISM, again, takes a phone number, but it doesn't give you the location. It gives you something else. And this message, what is it for? It's the first message if you want to deliver a text message. So it doesn't include the text message, but it tells you in what area somebody currently resides, which already is good information, and what their IMSI is. IMSI is the number of your SIM card, right? So that's really the number that you're known as a customer. Your phone number can change, but the IMSI that's really tied to
and that's registered with the HLR, which is your home location register.
Exactly.
Is that right?
So you send this over SS7 to the HLR, which is a kind of a known address for all networks, right? That's where people come knocking. And so if anybody in the world wants to send you a text message, they ask, where should I deliver this text message to? Which smaller entity, not the whole country, but which small entity? And what identifier should I use so that smaller entity knows whom I'm talking about? Because the phone number quickly disappears in this. Usually nobody knows what phone numbers are anymore. Even the phone doesn't know what its own phone number is, for instance, typically, right? So based on this first message, so again, we start with a phone number, we send this first message, we get the location, and we get the IMSI. Those we can use in a second message, PSI, that we send to this location, using the IMSI as a parameter, and that gives us the location, right? So both of these messages, though, are required. The first one, as I said, for instance, to deliver text messages. So it becomes a lot harder to defend from. There's not the one message you can block and solve this problem. Instead, now you would cut off legitimate functionality if you stop fixing that. But SS7 problems don't stop there, as we saw in that short video. We also read text messages. We spied on phone calls, so we could actually listen to a phone call done between two Australians in Australia. We did the same thing for the US, by the way, a year later. Also for a new show called 60 Minutes, but those two 60 Minutes apparently have nothing to do with each other.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about the USA network. You said that had some very interesting things to it.
The US networks in particular. Well, let me first explain what we did, and then I'll explain why that was more complicated maybe in the US. How do you spy on somebody's phone calls and text messages? Again, using only messages that are actually meant for different uses. So we didn't find one way to attack all incoming and outgoing transactions, but we have different attacks. And between two different attacks, we actually cover all of it. So this is the, by itself, most powerful attacks, as you see on the upper right. And you can use this to receive calls in both directions. So either if somebody is called or call somebody else, and also all the text messages that they send, but not the text messages that they receive. And how do we do this? Well, we abuse a protocol extension in SS7 that was actually meant for security purposes. It's meant to defeat fraud. So it's called Camel, like the animal, right, from the desert. Camel gives an operator the opportunity to control their roaming users' spendings. So basically, if you're roaming, and you make an expensive phone call, usually your network would only at the end of the day learn about this, your home network, because once a day they exchange all these charging records. But it could be that you used a prepaid SIM card and there wasn't even enough money on it to make that phone call, right? So Camel is a way to prevent that. Camel, before the phone call even starts, the roaming network asks the home network, is there enough money in the account? Or rather, it asks, if I were to dial this number now, how many minutes of money is there left in the account? After how much time do I have to cut off the call? Kind of like with a payphone, right? And that's a really smart idea. The problem is, though, that this protocol is overloaded with functionality. So I'll show you which functionality we abuse in a second. Also, it's not authenticated. So I can send an SS7 message that says, I'm the new Camel server now. The Camel server just changed, and I'm the new one. So tell me, instead of the real Camel server, what you want, and I'll answer. So obviously this opens fraud possibilities, right? If now I do have this prepaid SIM card with no money on it, but I can spoof the Camel server, I can say there's a lot of money on it, and then actually use that money, right? But we're on the topic of privacy, of course, and for privacy, this has another implication. The Camel server is allowed, and this is what I call feature overload, the Camel server is allowed to change the phone number that you're dialing. So for instance, if I in my address book have a phone number stored without the country code, I mean this to be a German number because my phone is in Germany most of the time. But if I dial that same number from my address book in another country, it shouldn't actually connect me to Germany, right? If you leave out the country code, you are connected locally. But the Camel server is smart enough to suspect that I'm still thinking of my phone book thinks I'm in Germany, and it changed the number to just add the German country code. So it's a smart function, but it actually allows the whole phone number to be overwritten. So how do we use this for spying on people? We say, whenever you want to call somebody, tell us over Camel that you do, and we'll tell you what phone number you actually wanted to call, right? And of course, that's our phone number. And we change the whole number. And then from our number, we call the real person connected to calls, and we're sitting in the middle as they're having their conversation, right? So that is how you can spy on pretty much anybody for phone calls and also for outgoing text messages, because there too, you could make that same mistake. Incoming text messages, though, not, because they're not charged. Camel does not have an implication there. For incoming messages, though, we have another trick shown here. Oops. Shown here. So everything incoming we can hack using another SS7 feature. We just over SS7 say your user is in my country now. So every SS7 connection is attached to a network, and many of them roam to one another, right? So we say your user just showed up in my country. So whenever they receive a phone call, connect it to me. I'll handle it, right? And then as soon as we receive a phone call, we'll connect it back to where the phone actually is. Again, we're sitting in the middle, right? Pretty straightforward and all pointing to a lack of authentication. Nobody has to prove anything over SS7. You can just say, hey, I'm a Camel server, and everybody believes you. You can say, your user is with me now, and there's no need to prove that, right? Of course, the user has a SIM card, and the SIM card has a cryptographic key, so you could generate some cryptographic proof that the user is actually there, but they don't. That's what was forgotten when I rushed in SS7. And maybe, John, actually, you made them rush it a little bit more because they actually fixed the problem by that rush.
Yeah,
right?
because after I was thrown in jail in 1976, I went out of my way to make sure everybody knew how to do it. And so I taught everybody how to do it. It was a very simple procedure to make the long-distance call. You just needed a blue box and a 2600 hertz tone, which come from the Captain Crunch whistle, but most of the boxes would just have its own 2600 generator. And you just dial up an 800 number, and it would put you out over the carrier, and you would just hear a little bit of a soft hiss, and then you send the 2600 hertz down the tone. It would get a little chirp sound coming back as your handshake signal, and it would just momentarily go off hook and then back on hook again, which is a signal for the originating sender to activate its phone number, and it just outpulses the phone number to the distant through the distant 4A to the distant number. And sometimes it would put the area code in, sometimes it wouldn't. And it's got mechanical translators, which translate 6-digit translation, which also made it really possible to scan 800 numbers. You didn't have to scan all 10,800 numbers. All you had to do is scan just 1,800 numbers. You'd skip by banks of 10 because it does 10-digit translation. So what happens is when you hit a bank of 10 that correctly, you would get a recording that says something like this: "We're sorry, your call cannot be completed as dialed." And then another time, you would say, "We're sorry, the number you have dialed is not a working number." Now, in that case, you're actually on the bank of numbers that has a valid 800 number in there. So then we scan every number at that point once we find it. And that was how we found the White House CIA crisis hotline number, because he just only had to scan 1,000 numbers in an 800-424 prefix. So we found the bank of numbers that bank of 10, we'd go 800-424, 0010, 0020, 0030, and then at 0040, we got the recorder that said, "We're sorry, the number you have reached is not a working number," instead of, "We're sorry, the number you have dialed cannot be completed, and this is a recording 2022. The 202 was the area code that came from. The 2 was a class of switching system that it came from. Usually the 2 would be a 4A switcher. Sometimes it'd be a 4, sometimes it'd be even 16. The larger the number, the smaller the switching center usually. And so that told me what trunk I was in, that told me where it was coming from, just by hearing the recording. And then once I found the right bank of numbers, I went through there, and then I got this person that was very rude to me. I said, "What number have we reached?" And he says, "Sir, the number you've reached, you're not," he said something to the effect of, "Get off this line." He was very rude, and I couldn't believe it. I said, "Wow, what is this guy doing?" They want to have 800 numbers. I mean, after all, they're paying for it. Why not they let the person call it? Well, it turned out that was a special number, and it was only to be used by certain people. So a couple months later, or actually couple weeks later, I called that number again, and I says, "Hi, this is White Plains 4A toll switching tandem center here. We're having some trouble with your 6-digit translation on your number. What number have we reached, sir?" He said, "You reached the White House CIA crisis hotline number." So I wrote the number down, and then the next thing I had to do was I had to find out what the 10-digit translation is, because it did 6-digit translation, which meant 202-456. 6-digit would translate to 800-424. So 800-424 translated to 202-456. So then I found out that 202-456-9337 was a 7-digit number. Once I found the 7-digit number, then we just used the auto-verify trunk, and I think it was 022. So you have to get into the 202 first. So you had to call an 800 number that terminated in the 202 area. So you didn't have to put the 202 in there. And then we did KP 022. 456-9337, it go clunk, blop, and you sit there in a dead line. A little bit of high pitch in the background. And then we just sat there and waited until a call came in. And when a call came in, it says, "Olympus, please." And the person said, "One moment, sir." And this was when we heard it, and it sounded just like Nixon. So we knew that Olympus would reach Nixon. A couple weeks later, I wrote that down. White House CIA crisis hotline, Nixon. Okay, fine. 2 weeks later, I was at a phone freak gathering, and a bunch of people were trading numbers, and I thought I'd trade that one off to get a number that I wanted. So I gave it to the guy. He took the phone away from me and says, "Let's try it." I said, "You don't want to try it. You want to stack with your trunks first before you try it." I says, "This is heavy stuff." So he says, "Okay, well, I'll stack a few trunks and we'll try it." And he did. He called a Watts extender number and I got a company. Then that 800, it was an 800 number. It was a dimension PBX, and then used the default code is 1234. And we did 1234, got another dial tone, dial 85 to get the Watts line, got another dial tone, and then we called the 202 number that we got him on the line, and my friend says, "Sir," they answered the phone. They says, "Olympus, one moment, sir." And so Nixon came on the line and I says, "Sir, we have a crisis on our hands. Sir, we're out of toilet paper." And we hung up. First time I'd ever been punked, the president.
Nice.
So that was sort of like some of the hanky-panky that we did back in those times when we understood the system. It was all done through in-band signaling. No longer possible.
Yeah, well, you make me feel lazy because everything we do is just over the internet, right? We connect to a computer, we send a few SS7 messages, and done, right?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of intricacy involved. There's a lot of intricacy involved in doing that. For instance, there's a system to where when you call an 800 number and you blow it off and you get to that trunk, next thing you want to do is you want to forward it to another trunk. That became possible because in Alaska, they translated 940, and 950. 940 was Nicholson Creek. 950 was Murphy Dome. These were standard 4A switching centers. It was shared by the U.S. Air Force. So the U.S. Air Force's Autobahn system also used the same switching system, but its access was 940, 950. But it wouldn't let a call go through because you were class marked as coming in from outside the military. You're on a commercial line. You're on like private net line. So what we did was we called KP 940 950 1230, and we get Alaska switch because 123 was the number for Alaska switch. So when you're in the Autobahn, you just pick up the phone, dial 123, and you get Alaska switch, and that's the Air Force switching number. So you do 123, and always it's the filler digit. It's just ignored by the trunk. So now you're on the Autobahn, and once you're on the Autobahn, then you can use guard banding. Then you can go into KP 940 950, and then the number. You can't go any past 10 digits, of course, because the trunk wouldn't take it. And then you blew it off, and then you land into the actual trunk of the Autobahn. From there, you do KP, and then you do one for priority, two for priority 2, and 3 for immediate, and 4 for flash override. You go into the Autobahn through NORAD with a flash override signal, and that means bad news. So we did stuff like that, and it was pretty scary stuff. And at the time that I got busted, one of the things that I had to do was I had to explain to the FBI exactly how I did it as part of my plea bargaining. So here I was in this hotel room in San Francisco. Okay, I had 2 brass from the Pentagon, 2 suits from the Secret Service, and 1 suit from the FBI, and here I was explaining to them all how it all worked. But I wasn't required to finger anybody. I was just explaining to them how it all worked. And they tried it, but they couldn't successfully do it. Because you know why? They couldn't get the intricacy time. Because the 3200, because what happens is you put 3200 into the trunk, it locks it. It's called guard band. Because what happens is when you're on a long distance call, if a person's voice has got a lot of 2600 compound in it, it would knock them off the call. So the system was designed to have guard band. What that meant was if there's any other frequencies present besides the 2600, it would lock the call and keep it from dumping the call. So all we did was put 3200, but 3200 was just outside the bandwidth of the voice call. So when it got to the second trunk, it would attenuate it down just enough to allow the trunk to go ka-ching, ching twice. Now you loop forward and you get about 2 or 3 times. 2 or 3 hops that way. And it was really, really precise. You had to get your oscillators perfect, you had to have perfect sine wave. And you had to make sure that the audio quality was just perfect. That's what's wrong with Steve Wozniak's box. This was square waves. And when you put square wave in an analog circuit, you're going to get all kinds of problems. And it's very easy to detect, and that was how I got busted. I got busted because one of my friends, he wanted my number. I told him, you can have my number, provided 2 conditions. Condition number 1, you never give it out to anybody. Condition number 2, you never write it down. Well, he wrote it down. He got busted. My number was in his address book, and that was how I got busted. Because he got busted by using Steve Wozniak's blue box.
Right. Well, I'm glad at least the telcos had style back in these days where even though you were the hacker, they kept apologizing to you, right? When you said, we're sorry on every call they did. I feel like that there should still be apologizing because I understand how they rush in a technology like SS7 in response to an acute problem like yourself, right? What I don't understand is why the same rushed-in technology is still the only technology used 40 years later. If it was a Band-Aid, why did it not get replaced in the meantime? In fact, it's in the name, SS7. So this is already the 7th version of an idea. Where's number 8? Why are we waiting for 40 years for something better than this Band-Aid? Now, we as a research team, we decided we're not going to wait for anything better anymore, for the telcos to fix it. We'll hope that they do, but we got to take matters in our own hand. And it turns out that as the user, you can, from your own phone, well, at least in many cases, know that you're being spied on, right? So in addition to developing the attack, we tried to develop a defense here. And we packaged up all kinds of defenses. So the slide shows basically an overview of all the different research things we did over the years in telco. SS7 is just one of them. But so how do you detect from a phone an SS7 attack? It turns out that every time somebody sends an SS7 message that's querying information about your phone, the network makes sure that your phone is still there, right? So it sends another message to your phone that the phone actually receives. And usually that's then followed up by a transaction. So you saw earlier how I used the first message in an SMS transaction to then stitch together something for a tracking attack. Now, I never send an SMS because that costs money. There's some charging issues involved, so I don't want to do that, right? But so now the phone receives this ping that lets it assume the next thing that comes is an SMS, and that SMS never shows up. So the phone actually could know that it's being surveilled, right? But this is hidden way deep in the phone. This is hidden in what's called the baseband. So we're not talking iOS or Android. We're talking kind of Qualcomm level, right? The actual radio chip on the phone sees this, and it never exposes it to Android. Unless, of course, you activate some debug interfaces, some secret functionality that luckily Qualcomm added to these chips, and then you would see it in Android. And that's exactly what we did then. Again, trying to take matters in our own hands. We put this in an Android app. They can read out this information. And aside from SS7 attack, find all kinds of other attacks. IMSI catches, for instance, you may have heard of. Kind of Stingray, I guess they're called in the US. They're very popular for covert police operations. So all kinds of stuff is packaged in this application. And it's mostly used as a self-defense application, so to warn you about attacks or even to prevent them. But we're researchers, so we also want to use the power of the community to go beyond just protecting every single person. So with this app in your hand, you can run all kinds of tests for yourself, but you can also choose to volunteer that information, upload it to our servers, and then we compute scores for how secure different networks are all over the world. And we have been publishing this on this website, gsmmap.org, for a couple of years now. And you can see, this is Norway. They made pretty good progress. You see how this curve is going up, a couple of years straight up. This is all based on community pressure, based on, in Norway, the media is pretty active in this. Media informing consumers complaining to their telcos, and the telcos actually switching from bad security configurations to good security configurations. If you look at the same line in Germany, it has a very similar shape. Other countries, though, like the US, almost a flat line. No reaction to public criticism yet. But that also is because the media is much less active. But that could just be that the public is much less interested. So in a couple of countries, we made pretty good headway with this. But as you can see here, there's still a bunch of really terribly secured countries, especially in Asia. So that would be the majority of the world's mobile phone population at this point, actually, is in countries that use no encryption, that or really bad encryption, that never implemented any security mechanism, and that is wide open on SS7, right? So this is just to encourage anybody who would want to get into hacking of any sort, especially phone hacking, to try that. Now, John may make it look like there's some black magic involved and all the cool stuff was found 40, 50 years ago. We find, though, that there's still tons to be found. And I just give you a little bit of insight into one of the research topics we did over the years. Here's all the others. So we haven't been running for too long. In fact, we officially only incorporated 2010, but we did some university-style research before. So every single year we find new issues of exactly that magnitude with billions of people being affected. And we're not running out of ideas anytime soon, right? And if we can do this, anybody can, right?
I can remember earlier when I talked to you, you talked about the AT&T network being so vast that there are so many little niches and nooks and crannies in the AT&T system that it can be pretty messy in there as well. I remember too reading something about the LTE. There was a new protocol. What's that called?
Yeah. So LTE is the first time that the networks changed the communication between each other since the 80s. And so they switched from what's called SS7 today to diameter.
That's it,
right?
diameter, yeah.
So it's completely IP-based, could be run over the internet. And in fact, a very similar system already exists for data roaming. So if I go to another country and I still want to browse the internet through my phone, that already for the last 20 years has gone through a system similar. Now the problem is, well, two problems. First, SS7 is not replaced by diameter, but it's supplemented by it. Most telcos still talk SS7, even if both telcos implement a diameter. Because as long as there's even one holdout who needs SS7, you need to keep SS7 too. The second problem is that those exact attacks I described here, they still work in diameter. They have not learned a bit. So there hasn't been any security upgrades. It's just a technology upgrade. And you were talking about the AT&T. So AT&T is an interesting attack target for us because it doesn't from the outside appear as a one network, but very different networks. And in fact, it was a very different network.
Even back in the days when I was phone phreaking, I mean, they had number 1 crossbar tandems, they had number 4 crossbar tandems, and eventually they had the ESS's 4Es, they called them. It was a digital switch, and these got replaced somewhere in the early 80s.
Right. And AT&T wasn't as big of a company even 10, 15 years ago, but it was very small companies, local carriers. Like you remember Singular, for instance?
Oh, yeah.
They got soaked into AT&T. So, and all of these companies still survive as infrastructures under the brand name AT&T. And each of them needs to be attacked slightly different. But once you figure out kind of the map of AT&T, it's no harder than any other networks. There's 2 networks, though, in the US and a few others around the world that are much harder to attack, or maybe even impossible over SS7. And that's networks that use a different technology stack, the CDMA technology stack. So in the US, there would be Sprint and Verizon. So now they got lucky. They use a different technology. They need to do all kinds of translation from SS7. And the attacks we're doing, they kind of get lost in translation.
So you want to protect yourself from spying. At least you now know which 2 carriers to use.
Well, I'm sure they have problems of their own. But if you don't use a global standard, then you're not going to fall victim to a global attack. That used to be true for Mac users, for instance. There were so few Macs that nobody wrote viruses for them. But now it's so popular, of course, there's viruses for that too. We'd have to go back to something less popular yet again.
Let's talk a little bit about the use of secure applications like Wicker and Signal and WhatsApp, and how people are able to hijack WhatsApp accounts. And people need to know about this. Explain how that's done.
Well, let me preface this by saying that I don't want to discourage anybody from using Signal, right? Everything is better than a normal phone call. Skype is better, WhatsApp is better, Signal is better. They're all strictly better than using a normal phone. But they're not perfect either. So WhatsApp and Signal, they rely on end-to-end encryption, which is great. For the first time, those companies, WhatsApp and Signal, they can't listen in on the phone calls anymore. Skype can now. They didn't used to in the day, but Microsoft changed it so they can. But Signal and WhatsApp shouldn't. But if you switch over to a new phone, you prove that you are the legitimate owner of that WhatsApp account by them sending you a text message, right? And then all your messages, including calls, they terminate at this new phone. But we saw just a few minutes ago how we steal text messages, right? How using the Camel product, no, well, not the Camel, just the second trick, we can receive incoming text messages that are meant for somebody else. So if you know somebody's phone number, you can hijack their WhatsApp or their Signal account. But of course, they would notice it, right? You receive the messages now, but they don't anymore.
Yeah, I mean, at the very beginning, they probably will be will be able to extract some secret information until you actually notice that your signal won't work anymore.
Yeah, I mean, again, it is much, much better than normal text messaging or normal phone calls, but it's not perfect either.
Yeah, and Edward Snowden, of course, recommended everybody to use Signal and WhatsApp and all these other apps because they are pretty good.
And so do I, yeah. It's
totally untraceable calls and totally off the record, and it's pretty good, and most of the data systems today support it.
Well, so during the Snowden discussion, I guess a lot of technologists settled at it's not acceptable that the state spies on everybody at the same time. Right. But it should be acceptable that the state spies on a few select people of their own choosing, be it what today is generally labeled as terrorists or pedophiles or whatever other buzzword police uses to reason about their means, right? So, and in a system where you have to go way out of your way to spy on every single person, you actually maintain that balance of power, right? Where there's no dragnet surveillance anymore by serving a letter to, let's say, Facebook and say, give me all WhatsApp messages, but where you have to specifically tag every single phone number, leave evidence, risk having that capability taken away from you if you use it excessively. That would appear as a fairer balance than what we had before Snowden days, which is every electronic conversation was probably surveilled.
Yes. I think at this point, what I want to try to do is take some questions. Do we have any questions from the local audience here? Now is the time to speak up or forever hold your peace. I see no hands raised at this point. Let's go over to the
Twitter.
Well, I was going to go to Twitter, but the phone timed out. So we're going to go to Roy Nordblom, who was just on earlier. He asks, if I'm using my smartphone simply as a PDA, no cellular chip, do I avoid this whole vulnerability?
I guess you're talking about the iPod Touch, right? Which is basically an iPhone where they extracted the radio chip. So that would be a pretty good PDA these days. A phone, though, if you keep it in airplane mode forever, that would also be protected from SS7 attacks. But as soon as you connect it to the mobile network for anything, not necessarily for making phone calls or sending text messages, the very least you should expect is that somebody can track your location. And the mobile network must know where you are, obviously, to connect calls and text messages to exactly where you are. So you're never safe from SS7 attacks as long as your phone, as a phone, is switched on.
And that means, of course, hackers can also get into small dumb phones as well.
Oh, yeah. SS7 is completely agnostic about the operating system of your phone. You can use the oldest, shittiest phone. It still has a location. It still makes phone calls. It still exchanges text messages. And all of this is hackable over SS7.
I have a question here from Liza Loop, who was earlier on last night's GeekFest. Why are we waiting for something better than this so-called Band-Aid? Some questions for SS7 communications and education. I'm not sure exactly.
So, why are we waiting for something better? I think because the benefits of using mobile technology still outweigh these risks, right? I don't know of a single person who, after this research, threw away their phone and never used the phone again, right? I'd like to do this, but it's just, I would forego so many benefits of mobile communication that I'd much rather be spied on and tracked, right? And that is why we're looking for a better technology than SS7 that would allow people to reap the benefits of mobile technology without being forced into tracking and spying.
Yeah, I mean, that's bad stuff. I have another question here from Liza Loop here. So given that there is no phone or internet privacy, how do we change our behavior? Personally, I just think I'm always shouting. That's what she says.
So I wouldn't go as far as saying there is no privacy. As I said just a few minutes ago, SS7 attacks are require dedicated effort per person that you want to spy on, and it leaves evidence about every person that you spy on. So it does come at some cost for the spyer. It does not allow for dragnet surveillance of whole countries, right? And I think that's the silver lining here. So everybody who is not on a target list of a criminal organization or of a state is probably not surveilled over SS7 right now. But that's not good enough, right? We want more privacy. We want, even for those people who are on this, let's say, journalists.
I mean, earlier when I was talking to you privately, you were saying that it takes several hours to set up the network and to probe the network to the point where you can actually do all this stuff.
Well, for a network, but
for a network,
let's say that network being AT&T. Of course, there's many people on AT&T that I could then spy on with small additional effort, but always at the cost of AT&T possibly knowing that I do it. They, after all, are receiving those messages over SS7. They now know who's on my target list. I do disclose information to them, and that's the very least that we should expect from at least a state agency spying, that there's some documented record of what they did and some possibility of catching them red-handedly if, let's say, they do spy on the opposition, if they do spy on journalists, if they do spy on other protected groups that, let's say, the NSA has no mandate to spy on.
Does SSA, I mean, does AT&T actually react to their being notified of these attacks?
AT&T may not be a good case here because they are reacting through publicity and publicity only, just by trying to discredit the researchers behind this. But many other networks did react. So those SS7 attacks I outlined here, they still work in the US, they probably still work in Australia, but they damn sure don't work in Germany anymore. There's 4 networks in Germany.
So they finally button up everything. Last I heard from some of your earlier sessions at the Chaos Computer Congress that you get, in one of your talks you gave, you said that 2 out of the 4 German companies have now buttoned up their systems, and now you've got all 4 of them?
Right, exactly. So even when we first publicly announced this research at the end of 2014, half of the German telcos had already closed these holes because, of course, it's not the public that we go to first, right? It's the mobile operators that we go to in the hope that they rush to fix this. And 2 out of 4 had fixed it at that point. And the other 2 followed since in the remaining 2 years, right? So I think that gives me hope that other telcos around the world could do that too. But of course, it does take a population maybe quite as scarred as Germany after Nazis and Stasi to demand that from their telcos. And I've not seen that in many other countries, especially the US as a developed country, but also the largest countries, China, India. Nobody that's advocating for mobile security. I guess they worry about other things.
A lot of the people that helped Edward Snowden live here in Berlin now, like Laura and the other people who helped Snowden escape into Russia. So in Germany, it's very, 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 very popular for people who want to keep away from big brothers, big nose.
I think Laura moved back to New York, but I think Berlin right now is a safe haven for a lot of people who either seek a community or seek to not be in a country where they think they'll be put to be court-martialed, right, for standing up for the right ideas.
Yeah, like the Stasi. I actually saw the Stasi museum last year. It was pretty intense.
Well, you learn from mistakes, right?
Yeah, right.
And Germany in its history made some of the biggest mistakes you could possibly make.
Okay, well, we've been given the timeout signal here. Thank you very, very much.
Yeah, thank you. Let me just say by concluding, everybody should be encouraged to do stuff like this. As you see on this timeline, it's not that hard to find new topics. And if you do look for a group to do that with, reach out to me, right? We're always looking for interested geek talent. Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
What does that Roy to say to all of this? Roy, what do you have to say about what you've heard?
Can you still hear me?
Yes.
I can remember, Roy, when you visited me in Las Vegas, you went up to Hoover Dam to just kind of take a look around, and you were really freaked out by some of the Department of Homeland Security's antics. Kind of explain what you mean by that.
Oh, I'd rather not talk about it in this way, Captain Coach. But yeah, there's no question about it. The police, I can't talk about it here, but they have really opened my eyes, this presentation, and I really want to find out more about this. And I had one question.
Yeah.
The question is, I have a smartphone, but I never put a chip in it because I don't want my smartphone to be Wi-Fi enabled. I want to be anonymous. And so my question is, if I have a smartphone without a chip, it does not have any capability of being a telephone, can that be spied upon?
Have you heard the question?
Yeah. So if you leave it completely in airplane mode, so if you don't allow it to ever connect to mobile network, then no, that would not be spied on. But phones have this neat feature where even if you have no SIM card in it or an expired SIM card, they still connect to any one network to enable emergency calls, right? And that, of course, means that some network knows where you are, that they see the unique number of your phone, and they can start tracking you around, right? But so if you don't need the emergency call feature, just keep it in airplane mode.
Yeah, and so even if you have an expired SIM card, take it out. Go in airport mode.
Yeah.
Okay, that was my question. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Great presentation.
Thank you for being here. I think we give a last applause to you. Thank you very much. And yeah, hope to see you soon. Back again.
All right, goodbye.
Bye. Bye.